Welcome to Sunday Reach by the Dominican Friars of the Province of India. Say good, not evil, that you may live. During the 8th century BC, the northern kingdom of Israel enjoyed unprecedented economic prosperity under King Jeroboam II. But this wealth was concentrated in the hands of the powerful elite, leading to exploitation, corruption, and injustice. Wealthy landowners used corrupt business practices to seize land from impoverished farmers, often through debt slavery. The courts, which were meant to be a source of justice, pronounced judgment in favor of the powerful and the rich. We can buy up the poor for money and the needy for a pair of sandals, and get a price even for the sweeping of the wheat. Give attention to the words, buy up the poor and get a price. Even the sweeping of the worthless chaff and dust was monetized. The prophet Amos emerged as a powerful critic of this injustice. Amos' voice was not just against individual act of greed, but it challenged a systemic failure, a system built on power, greed, and exploitation, fundamentally opposed to God's will. The judges and religious leaders turned a blind eye or actively participated in this exploitation. Israel had great patterns of devotion through lavish festivals and rituals, yet they ignored the core covenantal demand for justice. Almost in the same period, Judah, under the reigns of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, a prosperous urban elite thrived while an increasingly desperate rural populace suffered. Caught up between the rising Assyrian Empire and existing regional powers, military campaigns demanded immense resources, and the cost of warfare and tribute to foreign powers became an unbearable burden for the agrarian sector. Land acquisition for the sake of the returning military personnel was viewed as a means of reward or social advancement. Often these were, in fact, assimilated into the land-owning elite, intensifying pressure on small farmers. The Mosaic Law clearly points to the sacredness of land as God's gift and the protection of the vulnerable from perpetual indebtedness and landlessness. But the rich, according to Micah, were eating the flesh of the poor. Both Micah and Amos reminded that true worship was inseparable from social and economic justice and compassion for the oppressed. In this light, standing for justice and peace is not just a socio-political approach. It is a spiritual act. In the Roman-controlled Galilee of Jesus' time, a tenant farmer's debt was often paid in agricultural produce, like grain and oil. Large landowners would employ a steward to manage their estates and collect these debts. In the parable in the Gospel today, the steward was dishonest in his duty. When he knew that he was not going to be a steward anymore, he shrewdly manipulated his master's accounts. He was doing a great good for the debtors, but to ensure his own security. The steward understood that the oil's commission was excessive and its cancellation would generate immense gratitude from the debtor. The wheat's commission, while smaller, was also significant. It seems that the steward's actions were not simply a reduction of the core debt, but rather a total cancellation of an additional fee, the steward's personal commission. In the Gospel passage, we hear Jesus saying, "Use money to win you friends." It is something strange. But see, after the end of the parable, we see that the Pharisees who were lovers of money scoffed at him. Jesus' parable about the dishonest steward, in fact, makes a cynical observation about the world's ways. Verse 15 says further, that what is exalted by men is abominable to the Lord. In chapter 22, verses 25 to 27, speaking on authority, Jesus would say, "The rulers of this world lord it over them, and those in authority call themselves benefactors, as though doing great favor for those whom they rule." But Jesus says, you should not be like that. Similarly, Jesus' words, "Make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth," could be seen as a verbal irony, saying that you should not be like that. Even the prudence of the serpent mentioned in Matthew chapter 10 verse 16 does not encourage wickedness and cunningness. The rich fool in Luke chapter 12 verses 13 to 21 was also planning for his pleasurable future. The steward, facing a great shame in this parable, uses his managerial power to secure his own future. Jesus was clear in his message that one cannot serve two masters, God and money. Whoever is dishonest with a very little is also dishonest with much. At the end of the chapter, we have the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, telling us what happens to someone who turns heartless with wealth. His failure to be a good steward of his wealth leads to his eternal ruin. The end of the rich man acts as a clear and direct conclusion to the teaching begun with the dishonest manager, showing the tragic consequences of even those secure their future. The powerful often have a noble or even a divine face, because the system sanctifies them to maintain itself. There may be unfair labor conditions, lobbying for self-serving laws, and the evacuation of people in the name of development. See the global investments for war and ammunition in the name of security. All these appear to be noble purposes and good for the public. A cry for justice may be termed a revolt. Their so-called humanitarian service is often a strategic tool, a calculated investment that primarily benefits themselves. Like the dishonest servant in the parable, they use many resources to build a network of favors and goodwill that ultimately perpetuating an unfair and self-serving system. They become unquestionable and sanctified. The label of humanitarian goodwill permits compromises on more fundamental responsibilities like paying fair wages, ensuring safe working conditions, or protecting the environment. The systemic injustice condemned by the prophet Amos in ancient Israel has a parallel to the economic imbalance caused by the accumulation of wealth in the hands of a few, even in our time. Both situations are rooted in a concentration of power and resources that leads to the exploitation of the vulnerable and the breakdown of social justice. In Amos' time, the wealthy elite were faithful religious, performing rituals and sacrifices, while simultaneously trampling on the poor and denying them justice. The grand facade of religiosity and piety itself stood as a powerful symbol of exploitation and injustice. The master who praised the steward for his shrewdness himself must have been an unjust man, overcharging the debtors in the first place. Steward was participating in a system of exploitation within his given capacity. The steward's actions make a calculated survival strategy, creating a network of people who will owe him favors. This system, of course, would never let justice flow like a river. When the poor and the vulnerable are trampled underfoot, and when the system permits it and sanctifies it within religion and political structures, corruption, injustice, and oppression are normal practices, and even the divine justice will be trampled underfoot. Justice is not an act of one moment, nor a revolution or an outcome of activism. It is a matter of how we choose to form a conscience for our person, institutions, organizations, and the church at large. We can be easily insensitive to injustice when it is embedded in our very systems and celebrated in their normalcy. True worship of God is inseparable from a commitment to justice for the poor and vulnerable. Thinking that we are glorifying or pleasing God, we have many verses from the Bible in our houses, on our cars, and so on. Should we not add this verse? Let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. It is not a mantra. It is an active response to God's will and a sincere commitment in every walk of our lives.